Well, good afternoon or good evening or good morning, wherever you happen to be as you are watching live or watching the recording here. Glad you're back with us for another live iThemes training webinar. My name is Nathan Ingram. I'm the host here at iThemes Training, and we are joined today by Scott DeLuzio. Scott is a plugin developer, a husband, a father of three, and an Army veteran. Scott accidentally stumbled into web development while getting his degree in accounting. And after a deployment to Afghanistan back in 2010, Scott took his interest in web development to a new level by joining a consulting firm's in-house marketing team, and eventually started his own full-time web design business, maintenance and support, all of those things back in 2014. Now today, Scott is focused primarily on building WordPress plugins through his company, Amplify Plugins. Now, I've had the privilege of meeting Scott at a few WordCamps over the last couple of years, and late last year, as I was preparing for a plugin roundup webinar, I ran across his plugin, Privacy WP, and I saw that Scott had developed it, and I was excited to look at it, but it was really a bigger plugin than what we could do on a plugin roundup. So I started getting after Scott on when can we get you here on iThemes Training to talk about GDPR and Privacy WP. So today, Scott's going to talk to us all about those things and how Privacy WP can make your life easier as far as GDPR compliance. So with all that being said, welcome, Scott, to iThemes Training. I'm glad you're here today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So your business is Amplify Plugins. It's a lot more than Privacy WP. Tell us a little bit about Amplify and some of the stuff you're doing there.
Sure. So just a kind of quick intro. I am Scott DeLuzio, as Nathan was saying. I'm the founder and lead developer at Amplify Plugins, where we make plugins like Privacy WP, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. The plugins that we make focus on enhancing our customers' experience by basically extending the functionality of their website, which helps their business to work more efficiently. So that's the kind of thing that we do. We have e-commerce related plugins for WooCommerce and things like that. Also, other tax related plugins and lots of different plugins that we can basically business owners can use to make their business a little bit more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's always exciting to me to see a plugin company run by someone who has also spent some time doing client work. And that for me as a person who works with clients, it's just kind of a reassurance that the stuff you develop is, you've been there, done that, and this is going to make life easier for those of us working with clients.
Well, right. And a lot of what I've developed was developed while I was working on client sites and basically scratching my own itch, things that I was like, gee, I wish there was this thing out there, and I couldn't find it, or it was didn't quite do what I wanted it to do. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to figure out a way to build it myself, and that's where a lot of the plugins have come from.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're really focused on GDPR compliance. So what would you say are the biggest challenges for a typical website owner with GDPR?
Well, it's a big topic, right? It has a lot of pieces that kind of have to fit together, and especially for people who may be developing websites for clients, you sort of would need to understand the client's business and how they do things, how they process data, and things like that. And it's a lot for any one person to kind of absorb all that information. And so it's just a big cumbersome topic. And I think one of the challenges that a lot of people might face is just being overwhelmed by the amount of information that's out there and compliance measures that they kind of have to keep in check with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was one of the big frustrations is GDPR was really impacting people last year. One of the biggest frustrations, especially for stateside business owners, is, there's this massive, huge document that I'm not qualified to read or interpret, and yet there's supposedly these incredible penalties if I don't comply, and so on and so on. So, and there really weren't a lot of tools in WordPress at all at the beginning to deal with it. So that's why I was really excited to find your plugin here, and I'm looking forward to what we're going to talk about today. Now, just a couple of housekeeping details as we jump in here. Again, for those of you just joining us, the chat room is at ithemes.com/chat. ithemes.com/chat. Say hi and tell us where you're logging in from when you get over there. Lots of folks from around the U.S. and around the world with us this afternoon. I'm excited about that. The chat room is also the place to ask your questions. So we do not use the questions feature in the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you have a question, drop it in the chat room. It's always helpful for me if you preface your question by the word question and I'll uppercase. And that way I'll be able to pull that out of the chat. Now, one other thing, if you ask a question, pay attention to the chat because I may ask you a follow-up just to clarify some things so we can give Scott some good questions to answer as we're wrapping up today. And we will have a good time of Q&A as we end. So I think that hits all of the details. We will have the slide link available. Also, you're going to see on the screen some samples of exported information, and those will be included in the slides as well. So we'll have that slide link for you as we're wrapping up today. Also, the replay of today's webinar will be available in about an hour at the link that I just posted in the chat, the same link that you used to register for this webinar. So you can go back and rewatch if you'd like to, or share it with others maybe who should see this that aren't live with us right now. So I think that hits everything, Scott. Looking forward to this one. Let's dive into Privacy WP.
Sure. So when I was talking to Nathan earlier, he said that iThemes hasn't really done a lot of webinars surrounding GDPR and the privacy compliance type thing. So I wanted to start with the basics, going over what GDPR is, who it applies to, things like that, in kind of more general terms, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page and kind of knows what we're talking about. We'll get into Privacy WP, the plugin, the tech side of it in a little bit, but I just wanted to, before we got there, I wanted to make sure everyone knew what GDPR is all about. So with that, let's kind of dive into that a little bit. So what is GDPR, right? Real basics. It stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. It's basically a regulation set by the European Union that makes firm rules for how businesses are able to collect and store data on individuals. It says customers' data doesn't necessarily mean that they're customers in a financial transaction kind of respect. They could be just individuals who visit your website and fill out a contact form or something like that. So you as a business owner should be aware of the data that is coming into you and how you're handling it. The basic premise of GDPR, though, is to return the power to the individuals so that they can have control over what happens with their personal information. So that way they're not kind of blindsided with all of this information. Some of the types of information that's covered have up on the screen here. So obviously things like names and addresses, phone numbers, things like that. Basically any information that by itself or in combination with some other piece of information that can identify an individual is going to be covered by GDPR. One of the things, the ones that are listed here are probably the ones that are more common that you're going to see. It's not a comprehensive list of types of data. Another one that you might see that I didn't include here is considered behavioral data. So if you on your website, any kind of tracking scripts that you might have, like a Hotjar, if you use something like that, or some heat map kind of tracking, that type of stuff might be included, depending on what information is being collected, and analytics type data could also be included with that as well. So that's kind of the basics, the basic background of what GDPR is. Now, with that said, probably should figure out, does GDPR, the law, actually apply to you? GDPR applies to any business anywhere in the world that processes the personal data of EU citizens. Now, you might be thinking to yourself like, okay, well, I own a small business and it's maybe a restaurant or something that's located inside the United States, and so I don't actively collect data on EU citizens, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll never collect data on an EU citizen. For example, if on your website you have a little sign up form that that's get a $5 coupon off your meal by entering in your email address, and some European citizen is now coming to the United States on a vacation or business trip or whatever, and they find your restaurant, they enter in their email address. Well, you've all of a sudden collected some personal data on an EU citizen, despite the fact that they're not necessarily in your target market. People who live in your general geographic area. So now you've started collecting this data, and you don't really have any control over who might be entering in that information. Some people have suggested using IP address blockers, but with a VPN or even by traveling, you can easily kind of get around that type of thing. So none of that is foolproof. GDPR requires businesses to have a presence inside of the EU. If you don't have any employees or like a physical, like an office or a warehouse or something like that inside the EU, you're supposed to appoint a data representative inside the EU to basically satisfy that requirement. A lot of companies offer a data compliance representative type service where you can kind of contract out to them to be that representative, and now you technically have some sort of presence inside the EU by doing that. There is an exception to that where if the data processing is just occasional, but that's one little exception to that particular rule. We're talking more general, where if you have that type of data processing, you should have some sort of presence inside the EU, whether it's a physical presence of your own employees, or if you're contracting out to some sort of representative there. Okay, so some of the main aspects of GDPR that I wanted to cover. The first one is the consent and privacy policy. So traditionally on the web, we've seen a lot of times when you're buying something online, you might see at the end of the checkout form a little box that says subscribe to our newsletter, and the box is pre-checked. That's something that you easily could skip over as you're filling out the checkout form, and you click submit, and all of a sudden now you're on this mailing list or whatever. Under GDPR, the data that gets collected is supposed to be collected in a kind of opt-out by default manner. So that there's nothing really wrong with having a checkbox to say subscribe me to your newsletter, but by default it should be unchecked as opposed to checked. So if someone wants to subscribe to your newsletter, they physically have to check that box in order to basically show that they're providing that consent to you. Now, with that, you should also have a privacy policy that states the type of data that gets collected, who has access to that data. Is it employees in your company, or is it being sent to some third party, somewhere else where that data is going? And what is that data being used for? Obviously in an e-commerce transaction, the billing information and the shipping information is using to fulfill the order that they've placed. So things like that is what that would go into that privacy policy. The second aspect of GDPR that I wanted to talk about is data access and portability. Individuals must be able to view their data that you've collected. They should be able to make changes to it and take that data with them to another provider or something like that. Now, the thing that I really like about this is the ability that it gives individuals to make changes to their data, because as a business owner, I know that if I'm taking all this time to collect all sorts of data, whether it's building a mailing list or for email or for snail mail, sending postcards in the mail or flyers or things like that, I want that data to be as accurate as possible. So if one of my customers happens to move or they change their email address or phone number or something like that, I definitely want them to be able to update that information so that they can continue getting the information that I'm sending, and I'm not just sending it to the wrong address, for example. And that helps both the business and it also helps the individual because they can continue getting that information if that's truly something that they want, down the road. Individuals also have the right to know if their data that you've collected has been compromised in some way or hacked into. So that way they can take the appropriate measures to kind of safeguard their data. For example, if it's financial data, credit card information or things like that, they can take the appropriate measures with their credit card company to cancel the card and get reissued a new card or something like that. So so they should have the right to know if that information has been compromised in any way. And then the third aspect that I wanted to talk about is the right to be forgotten. People can request that their data is deleted from your system, wherever you happen to have it stored. Now, this is truly a request. It's not an absolute guarantee that as soon as they request it, you have to absolutely delete everything, because you as a business might still be subject to certain regulatory requirements. I know in the US, the IRS has some data retention requirements for financial transactions, sales records, and things like that. So you can't necessarily delete everything just because someone requests it, because you also have an obligation to retain some of that data for regulatory purposes. Certain industries have other data retention policies that might also need to be adhered to as well. So again, that's kind of it's kind of a request, but it's going to depend on the industry that you're in, the geographic location, what laws apply to you in terms of retaining data. But with that said, you're not supposed to keep any of the data for longer than you need it. So if someone has an e-commerce transaction today and then tomorrow they request that their data is erased, you can tell them, well, I can't exactly erase it quite yet, but I'll erase it once when I can, when the law allows me to erase it at that point. So talking about all of that, you might say, well, I don't really think GDPR is going to apply to me. I don't really want to have to worry about it. It's a lot of time that's going to take or expense to become compliant with GDPR. So I wanted to kind of go over some of the penalties that Nathan alluded to earlier. The maximum penalty under GDPR is 20 million euros or 4% of a company's annual revenue, whichever one is greater. Now, I know for my business and probably a lot of people's businesses that the 20 million euros is the greater of those two numbers. Now, it's still a very big number. But I think that number is what had a lot of people in a panic back when GDPR was first kind of coming around in like the springtime of last year, where people just saw that number and said, okay, if I don't do something right away, I'm going to be on the hook for 20 million euros, and I couldn't possibly pay that. So that's a big problem. The penalties are kind of at the discretion of each individual country that is inside the EU, and they can do things like issue a warning. So if you are doing something incorrect under the GDPR, they can come to you and say, this is what you're doing, this is wrong. Here's a warning that you've done something wrong, and then that gives you the opportunity to go back and correct it. So that way you're not you're no longer out of compliance with that. And then it could lead all the way up to fines. But even once when it gets to that fine level, doesn't necessarily mean, I don't believe that they're going to just jump straight to the 20 million euro fine. There could be fines that are under that as well. Okay, so kind of covered some of the basics of GDPR, what it is, who it applies to. It's a very big topic, and in the amount of time that we have today, I don't think we could possibly cover everything. And I think that's something that individual businesses kind of need to take stock of on their own to kind of see what they are going to need to do and changes that they may need to make to their individual business. Maybe there's nothing. Maybe you've all along been doing things in compliance with GDPR, but that's something that each individual business needs to kind of take stock of. So now I kind of want to get into the tools that are available to us as WordPress users. Back in May of last year, WordPress version 4.9.6 came out that introduced some new privacy-related tools. Some of these tools allows for the export or the erase of personal data that's stored on your site. And it gives a system kind of like what we're showing in this screenshot here, that allows you to export or erase this personal data stored on the site. It also allows you to create a privacy policy on your website. Now, I know the privacy policy sounds like, well, it should just be a page on your site, and that's true. It basically is just a page on your website, but the tools that are available in WordPress allow WordPress itself, as well as other plugins, to kind of hook into this section where they can, individual plugins and WordPress can tell you as the site owner what is going on with the data that these plugins are collecting or that WordPress is collecting. So for example, WordPress in general, they have user accounts, right? There's a bunch of personal information in there. Comments on your blog post can contain some personal information because usually the person enters their name, their IP address gets logged, and things like that. All that information gets in there. Plugins like WooCommerce, for example, have an ability now to hook into this privacy policy and tell you, the site owner, what information WooCommerce collects and what it's doing with it, how long it retains it for. And so that way you can craft a more accurate privacy policy. I wouldn't necessarily copy and paste all of the text that this gives you because a lot of it might be written by developers like me who are not necessarily lawyers who are going to put this information together. They can probably accurately tell you the data that's being collected and where it's going, but maybe not in using legal terms that might necessarily need to get into that privacy policy. So we're talking about the comments and user accounts already. Plugins can also extend this export and erase requests to include the information from the WooCommerce orders, so that when someone requests an export of their personal information, it includes all the information that WooCommerce has collected in an order, or a contact form like Gravity Forms or Ninja Forms. It can include the form submission data that has been collected. So that data can be exported along with the user account and the comments that are typical in WordPress, and it also can be erased through these tools, which is kind of neat. But there are some problems with these tools that are in WordPress. The export and erase request process is kind of difficult to do. It's kind of clunky. So the process would basically look like someone would have to get in contact with the site owner in one way, shape, or form, whether they're filling out your contact form or they email you some other way or they call you or something. And then you have to, the site owner, you manually have to type in an email address here on this form and click send request. And then you have to wait for them to confirm their email address. They'll get an email, they have to click the link, and then it confirms it. And then you have to come back to this page and click either export or erase their data. It's to me, it seems like it's a kind of a long and a little bit more complicated of a process than it needs to be. The messages that are displayed to users is not easy to edit either. They sometimes after the user clicks the link to confirm their email address, they're brought to your site and they're shown a kind of a generic sentence or two. But if you don't know how to code, if you're not a programmer, you're not going to be able to edit those messages. So that's a little bit, makes things a little bit more difficult for you if there's more information that you want to include with that message. And then finally, the third problem that I see with the tools is that your business or your client's business is not limited to the data that's stored on your website or on their website. You likely have data that's stored elsewhere, offsite, in other third-party services, a CRM or your email marketing program or your payment provider, things like that. So the data is not strictly limited to what's on your website, which is all that this form will touch by default. It'll only collect, export or erase the data that's stored on your website. So if, as a business owner or as a site administrator, you now have multiple steps to go and satisfy the compliance with exporting the data or erasing the data from all these various sources that you might have. So with problems, if I'm going to give you a problem, I'm going to try to tell you a solution too. Now, Privacy WP is the plugin that we're talking about. It's actually two plugins. There's a free version that's available on WordPress.org, and you can download that and use that right away. And I'll talk about what that does. And there's also a pro version that does a little bit more. Now, before I get into this, I should say that no plugins are going to make you 100% compliant with GDPR. Because as we kind of talked about, GDPR is more of a series of actions that you're going to take on your end as the business owner in terms of how you're processing data, how you're collecting it, where you're storing it, how long you're storing it for, and things like that. So a plugin isn't necessarily going to just automatically be that magic bullet that makes you 100% compliant. It'll help you. It'll make things a little bit easier for you, but it's not going to guarantee you that you're going to be compliant. So Privacy WP, the free version that's available on WordPress.org, allows you to do a few different things. The first is it allows you to edit the export file expiration length. So by default, it's 3 days. But think about it this way. Let's say you have someone who requested an export file on a Friday, and the following Monday is a holiday, and so you send them the export file late in the day on Friday, and they don't check their email for a couple days over the weekend, and then they don't check it on Monday because they're off celebrating the holiday. And by Tuesday they come around and they check their email, they click the link, and oops, it's expired, and now they can't access that export file, which basically makes you as the site owner or administrator have to run through that whole process of exporting the file and sending it to them all over again. It's kind of a pain to do. It would be really nice to be able to increase that number of days that the file would expire, if that's a kind of situation that you're concerned about. If you don't know how to code in PHP, you're probably not going to have a very easy time to edit that. So Privacy WP allows you to just very simply change the number of days. Just type in 6 days or 7 days, or whatever it is that you want it to be, and then save it, and then it all of a sudden will increase the length of time for that expiration for those files. It allows you to change the messages that are shown on your website to users after they confirm that they want to export or erase their data. It also allows you to edit the email that's sent to the users with the link to their export file, which all of these things, again, if you didn't know how to code, you would have a very difficult time trying to figure out how to do this. And then finally, the fourth thing that it does is it provides you with a self-service export and erase request form. So basically, instead of having to go through this whole process that I talked about before, where you enter in the email address and wait for them to confirm it and then export or erase the data, the self-service form basically gives your site visitors a way to enter in their email address, choose whether or not they want to export the data or erase it, click submit, and it does a lot of that process for them, or for you as the site owner. They get the email pretty much automatically to confirm their email address, and then they click the link, and all that's left for you to do is just send them the export file or erase their data on your end. So it's a lot smoother of a process to do it that way. Now, I want to show you real quick just some of the settings for the Privacy WP, the light version. To change the expiration date, as opposed to figuring out how to code all of this information, just change the number of days in the settings, click save, and you're done. And automatically, now you have a different expiration date than what's default in WordPress. The confirmation messages, and I'll show you what this looks like on the front end of your site in a second, but same thing, you just fill out a text box here and click save, and all of a sudden now these are the messages that will be displayed to your users, which will look something like this. Where they click the link in the email that says, please confirm that you want to export your data or erase your data. They click the link, they get shown a page that looks like this, and this is the text that you would have entered in the box over here. So these are just kind of examples of what that might look like. And then the export, when you're exporting the data, after they've confirmed that yes, this is my email address, and yes, I want to export the data, they get sent an email that has a link to their personal data, a file basically that they'll download, and it'll have all of their information. The default message that's sent to them is not very, it's kind of generic. You might want to include some more information, maybe about your company or other contact information that they can use to, if they have questions about anything. So you can customize that using Privacy WP. We give you little shortcode, not shortcodes, little placeholder text here that you can use to put in things like the expiration date of their file, so they know when they need to download it by, the link to their file, your site name, and your URL. You can enter those anywhere in the text that you want. Click save, and all of a sudden now that's the email that is going to get sent to them. And then finally, we have the request form shortcode, the privacy data request shortcode. This code here you can copy and paste into a page on your site anywhere, and it'll look something like this. Obviously, depending on your theme, it'll look a little bit different. But then the user can just type in their email address here, click export or erase, and then click the send button, and then all of that process kind of gets handled for you, and you don't have to worry about all that stuff as the administrator of the site. So that's all what Privacy WP, the light version of the plugin, does. And you can download that now for free on WordPress.org. And you can start using that right away if you're so inclined. Now, the pro version of Privacy WP, what it does is it allows you to access the data that you might have stored in third-party sites in the export and erase requests that are being made. So sites like MailChimp or Stripe or Help Scout for your support tickets, ConvertKit, Drip, SendGrid, and there's others that we're developing currently, actually, that we'll be putting out there. with this list, this is a incomplete list, and we're always adding more. If you have suggestions, please feel free to drop it either in the chat, or you can use our form on our website, which I'll link to later. And you can let us know. I'm always happy to hear about other integrations that people might be using and might find useful, and so we can work on getting those in there for you as well. Real quick, the settings screen for this, you might think like, oh, I have to do a lot to get this to work. It's really not. We show you how to get your API keys, which you would need from all of these different services. We have links to articles on how to find them, or if it's simple enough, we might just say, click on these settings in your account and then copy and paste that into the settings, click save, and then now your export and erase files will have all of this data from all of these third-party sites. Now, what I want to do real quick is I just want to show you a couple of the export files, just to show you what it looks like, because if you've never run it on your own, you may not know exactly what kind of data is coming out in these types of reports. So I have a couple examples here. This example is just a test user that has nothing really offsite. This is not using Privacy WP at all. This is just stuff that is stored on the individual website. So it has information like the user account information, so their name and the email, date that they registered, and things along those lines. WooCommerce has hooked into this this export report and has provided information like they bought a polo shirt at $20, and this is their address and phone number and email address and all that information from WooCommerce here. And also the individual left a comment on the website, and so now we have that comment as well that is showing up here. So we have all of that information showing up. Now, it's good, but it doesn't paint a full picture. If you're a business owner and someone said that they wanted to export all of the data, this is a very incomplete picture. It's not going to show all of the information that you have elsewhere. And so as a business owner or a site administrator, you're going to have to now figure out, go to all of the other places that you have some of this personal information stored. So MailChimp, for example, or Stripe for payment information. You're gonna have to go to these websites and figure out how to export that data for each individual that might be requesting it. And then when you send it to them, it's gonna all be in a bunch of different formats. Some of it might be in a CSV file, some of it might be in a text file, or maybe a PDF. I'm not sure all of the different formats that all the different companies exported in, but regardless, if I'm a user who is getting this information, it's not going to give me the warm and fuzzy feeling that that I'm getting a full picture, because I'm getting bits and pieces from everywhere, and it just doesn't seem quite right, and it's hard to look through all these different file formats and everything like that. So where Privacy WP, the paid version, comes in is we take all of that data for you, and so this is another example where again, we have all the user information and orders and comments from WordPress itself and other plugins. But we also include things like the MailChimp subscriber, where it has the individual's name and their address and IP addresses when they signed up and when they opted in. They have very specific location information, the latitude and longitude, time zones and things like that, which is not included in this other report over here. We didn't have any of that information. So that information gets included in the report. If they made payments on your website or elsewhere, you might have credit card information. So that's financial data that's protected under GDPR. The last 4 digits of their card number or the expiration date, things like that might be included. Individual charges that might have been made, how much the charge was for, so $49 US. other information about the transactions get included in here as well. If there was shipping information, that might get included as well. This particular one didn't really have anything. Customer information, again, more information about their address and things like that. Individual invoices, which gets far more detailed, where it has the amounts that they've paid and the dates that the things were created, stuff like that. And then we can go down, and they have also, I believe, some subscription information. So that's also useful information. When is the next time I'm going to get charged? You might be able to see that in a subscription type thing like that. But we export this type of information from all of those services that we were talking about earlier in here on the slide. So this type of thing is that type of information, I should say, is what you can expect from all of these services. And now what you saw there is also the type of data that gets erased from those services should someone ask for their data to be erased from your system as well. And so you don't have to, as the business owner, as the site owner, you don't have to go and figure out how to export or erase any of that information. And it's just as easy as entering in your API key from your account, clicking save, and it just will get included in that report that gets generated. And that's basically the gist of what I have here in terms of talking about Privacy WP and the various features that it has, and as well as GDPR kind of compliance. And so, Nathan, I think you had some stuff that you wanted to talk about.
So, absolutely. So we talked about the free version of Privacy WP does a lot, and there's also a pro version, and there's a few different levels of the pro version. You want to put that pricing grid up on the screen?
Oh, yep.
Just for anybody that's interested.
Can do that. Yep.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we have those three versions. Yep. Go ahead.
No, why don't you just talk a little bit about each of those and what's going on?
Yeah, so the three levels here, it's all the same plugin. Just the difference is basically the number of sites that you can install it on. And I know Nathan was saying that a lot of people here manage multiple sites. So we do have an unlimited site option here for $89 that allows you to install the plugin on as many sites as you want. If you have fewer sites, we also have smaller options as well. And if you want to just try it out, you want to try it out on one site, you want to try the $29 option, so you're not investing as much, you can do that. You can also upgrade later on to the higher levels and basically get a credit for what you've previously paid. So the most that you would pay on any given year would be the $89 for that.
Yeah, so if you're managing multiple websites for clients, especially those who are really focused in the EU, the Ultimate package is a really great deal. $89 covers all your websites. Also, there's a special deal for those of us on today's webinar as well. There's a 25% off coupon code. iThemes gives you 25% off of any of those packages that you decide to purchase. So, Scott, they'll just enter that code iThemes at the time of purchase and get the 25% off?
Yep, and the website is privacywp.com. You can go to that, enter in the discount code on the checkout page where it asks you for it, and just type in iThemes as you see it there in all capitals, and it will give you 25% off.
Awesome. And how long is that deal good for?
That's good for forever. So if you are seeing this, I will keep that up there. Even for people who are watching the replay of the webinar down the road, we'll keep that up there for people to get access to it.
Excellent. So if this is something that you would be interested in, take advantage of that. 25% off, and that unlimited package, $89 for all your websites, is a really great deal. So, Scott, we've got a lot of questions stacked up here, as I sort of figured that we would. And if you have not yet asked your question and you'd like to do so, please jump in there in the chat room, ithemes.com/chat. Ask your question. Try to preface that question with the word question in all uppercase. That's helpful to me. And let's dive in here. So, Mark had a question about is making the data accessible making your website less safe. So by providing this level of, the exports and so forth, Is that in any way impacting the security of your WordPress site?
So the data that gets generated, it gets sent to the user. The only way that I can kind of, in my mind, think of how it would be any less safe is if somehow their email account was compromised and the request came from someone who had hacked into their personal email account and then somehow came to your website and said, I'd like to export this data. And then they get the email, they go through the process of confirming, and then they go through the process of downloading that information. But that's kind of up to the end user. It's no more insecure than anything else would be, because if they had access to your email account and that you have an account on somebody's website, they'd probably have access to this data anyways, by being able to go in and change your password on an account and somehow be able to log in by using the password reset form that's available. So I don't believe that this makes it any more insecure, unless the person has been compromised. But again, I believe that information would be available to the hacker, the person who hacked into their email account anyways. So I don't think that this by itself is making things any less safe.
Excellent. Ben would like to know, do you have to state for how long that you are keeping a particular kind of data and then erase it after that time has passed?
That's a good question. I believe certain data, you're supposed to talk about what you're doing with the data and how long it gets retained for. I don't know the specifics on whether or not as far as the law is concerned in your privacy policy, whether or not you need to say it'll be erased on X number of days, weeks, months, years after collecting the data. But that's something I can look into, and if he wants to follow up, I'll post my contact information later, and we can talk about that offline.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, if you want to just flip forward to your thank you slide, it has your contact information there. Sure. There you go. So Ben, if you want to reach out to Scott directly, he's a great guy. I would recommend that. There you go. Me at scottdeluzio.com. Also, I dropped a link in the chat for a webinar from last May with Anna Blanche Rabe, who is an attorney and speaking about GDPR. And I think we covered a lot of these technical questions in that webinar as well. And so that's available to replay at the link that I just dropped in the chat. So, and if you're watching this after the fact, you can find it in the free webinar library on iThemes Training. We had several questions that have come in from Mark, Susan, Leslie, all kind of centered around the same topic, which is Privacy WP working with other WordPress plugins like Gravity Forms or Contact Form 7 or WooCommerce, that sort of thing. Does Privacy WP pull in Gravity Forms entries and that sort of information as well?
It does not, and that was one of those things that I kind of was on the fence about including in the plugin. The reason why I did not do that is because I've determined that the plugin developers who develop those plugins, WooCommerce, Gravity Forms, and things like that, they know their plugin way better than I'll ever know it. And for me to go around and try to investigate every single one of these plugins and what data they're storing and where it's stored and everything like that would not really be doing it justice. I'd probably miss things that they would be more likely to capture. Now, with that said, them being developers, it's really not that hard for them to hook into the export and erase functions in WordPress to include all of the data from their plugins. And as a matter of fact, we've seen that in the example that I showed where WooCommerce did hook into that, and WooCommerce already is providing order information. So for Privacy WP to include that, it would just be duplicating the data, and it's really unnecessary.
Yeah, and that's really a smart way to approach this issue rather than the Privacy WP plugin having to, know everything there is to know about all these WordPress plugins that may or may not capture any data. You're just really relying on those plugin developers to be good citizens and link into the existing WordPress function, which you make use of, and kind of help to make a little better with Privacy WP. Is that right?
Exactly, and most of them are already doing this. They're already including their data in the export forms, and if they're not, then you can always reach out to them and just ask them to include that. If they have any sort of pushback, send them my way, and I'll show them how to do it.
Excellent. This is a good question from Kim. I'm going to kind of jump ahead to this one because I think it's a really good question. Kim wanted to know, how do you deal with your site and database backups that contain this information? So, for example, you do an information request, erasure, and then something happens. You have to restore a backup, and for whatever reason, the backup still includes that person's information that was erased before, but now it's been restored and it's there. What do you think about that? How do you deal with that?
That's a great question. I've kind of pondered that question myself, to try to figure out what is the best way to do that. I think one of the things that you might need to do is just be aware of the individuals who have asked for these export and erase requests. Technically, those backups should also be scrubbed, but as we all know, that's a very difficult process to kind of go through, and I'm not sure how technically you could do that and still retain the kind of data integrity that you have for all of those backups. And so it may be one of those things where you need to just kind of keep tabs of that information and just know that you might need to go back and rescrub some of that data at some point. That may not be the best answer, but it's the best thing that I've come up with so far, is in terms of the exporting or sorry, the erasing of that type of data.
Yeah, it's a kind. This is kind of what you get when you have politicians writing data laws, and the practicality of erasing information when clearly we have to have backups. That's a real issue, and depending on who you talk to in the GDPR world, you get different answers on that. And the challenge is a lot of the wording in the GDPR is vague, and it's they're waiting on the courts to actually have arguments and prove out the practical implementation of GDPR. So there aren't answers. It's all theory at this point. So that's kind of, it's complicated, and it's really hard for us as business owners to decide what to do.
And I think that's one of the issues too with all of this is it's just so new. It's less than a year old, and so there really hasn't been too much precedent with different court cases and things like that that we can kind of fall back and rely on. There may have been some things, but I don't think all of the law has really been fleshed out in the courts yet. So
exactly.
So we'll see where that comes in the coming weeks and months and years.
Yeah, for sure. And in any court of law, having if you have a plugin like Privacy WP on your site and you've put your best effort forward, you've done all these things in good faith, and you miss a little something somewhere that was truly, that goes a long way in court. If you ever have to stand in court, I've done as well as I can as a small business owner here. That tends to go a long way in these sorts of cases. But again, I'm not an attorney. Let's move on to our next question here, as we're starting to run short on time. Is Privacy WP WPML compatible?
That is a good question. I believe there should be no problems with that. There's oh, I'm sorry. You said could you repeat the question?
Does Privacy WP, is it WPML compatible?
That we have not gotten into quite yet. So as far as the language goes, we haven't necessarily done that yet, but it's on our to-do list, so it will be coming out in the near future.
Great. And Ben also wanted to know, do you get a log of what has happened? Like, is there somewhere where it's tracked all these export and erase requests? Um,
Uh, yeah, so I can actually, let me scroll back a few slides here. Where did we go? It's not a great log. This is what WordPress collects. And it has all of the email addresses that were entered into the export or erase form. And when you initially send those requests, they'll be in a, it's kind of off the screen a little bit here, but they'll be in a pending status. So they won't quite be ready to export or erase yet. But once when the individual clicks that link on their email and confirms it, it'll be a confirmed status. And WordPress keeps all of this information here. Like anything, you could go in and you could delete these individual requests, but it does keep it in some manner here. And you can also go back on the exports, and you can go back and re-download that data if need be.
Excellent. Now, the last two questions here are somewhat legal in nature, and you guys, we'll ask Scott and kind of put him on the spot here for these. But remember, Scott is a business owner; he is not an attorney. But these are good questions, and Scott, you may have some great answers to these. Greg would like to know if we're only collecting emails that are going to an email marketing provider like Aweber, Constant Contact, MailChimp. Does each business need to be concerned about the GDPR compliance of that, or because the data is on those other services, is it their responsibility?
Well, so the way I understand it, and again, like Nathan said, I am not a lawyer, so I could be wrong on this, but the way I understand it is that since you as a business have access to that data, you use that data in your email marketing campaigns and things like that. The onus is kind of on you to be able to determine what data gets exported or erased from those services. If you were to keep all of that data on a spreadsheet on your computer, and then use that to send out emails manually, one at a time, for example, it would still be your responsibility to keep track of that data and include it in the export or include it in the erase request and delete it when necessary. So my thought is that it is something that the business owner, individual business owner, needs to be responsible for in terms of the exporting and erasing of that data. I don't know for sure if any of the like the email service providers have a way for somebody to just say, show me all of the information that you have for me, Scott DeLuzio, on all of the various mailing lists that I might be a member of from all of their various customers. I don't know that feature exists anywhere, at the moment through those services. So now there really wouldn't be any other way other than the individual business to be able to export that data or erase that data.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the way I understand it as well. The right to be forgotten, for example, it pertains to your business, not your website. And, if you have a customer in the EU that comes to you and they want to be forgotten, have all their information purged, it doesn't matter where that information is as it relates to your business, whether it's, like Scott said, in a spreadsheet on your computer or on your WordPress site or on MailChimp or Constant Contact or whatever, you have to purge the information wherever it may be. So, and again, I'm not an attorney either, but that's my understanding of the implications of the law. Here's another question from my own worst enemy. She'd like to know if someone from the EU wants to export, the law there says the site owner, we as a site owner has to provide that. But do we have to comply with export or delete requests from customers in the United States?
Well, that's a good question. Again, kind of bordering on the legal side. And as I'm not a lawyer, there could be things that I'm missing here, but I know there are certain individual states in the United States, California being one of them, that are introducing their own privacy-related laws, and I believe there may even be one coming in on the federal level. I don't know for sure what that looks like, and so at the moment, I guess the answer is it depends. Where is that individual located? If they're located in a state that does not have, these types of laws that require you to do it, or if you're not located in a state that requires you to do it, then you may not necessarily need to. But I think if you were to just ignore the request, I know if I was the one who was asking for that data and you ignored the request for me, I wouldn't really have a good feeling about you or your business. And so I think the better answer would be to just comply with it. It's their information, send it to them. It's a relatively painless thing to do if you have the right systems in place, and just send that information to them. And but it's your business, and different situations might apply to you. So you'd have to probably the better answer is talk to a lawyer.
Yeah, for sure.
To figure out what you should do in those situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, just for those of you who aren't aware and you're in the States, the state of California is, I think it's either has passed or it will come into effect here very soon. It's called the CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act. And I've dropped a link in the chat that compares the CCPA to GDPR. And as soon as that takes force in the state of California, all of us stateside are going to have to comply with that. Now, the funny thing about this is, when GDPR came about, it was like a major meltdown for web business owners. And now we got to comply. But if you really look at the principles behind GDPR and CCPA as an individual person, I mean, these are things that I want. Yes, it's going to be a pain to comply with, just from, as having to be a person who deals with that sort of thing. But I mean, I want the right to be forgotten by certain companies. So, I think, at least from my opinion, it's a good thing, but wow, we have to kind of get there from here. And so Scott, I'm glad guys like you are figuring these things out.
Thanks.
Okay, one more question here and we'll wrap things up. And again, this is one more legal question, but you might know the answer here. Mark is asking, are you liable if your customer's data on, for example, Stripe is breached? So like and what he's concerned about is, hey, say my client downloads this report and he sees these Stripe logs and somehow Stripe gets compromised. Could he as a business owner be on the hook because he didn't react quickly enough or didn't warn the client or whatever? What do you think about that scenario?
I think, again, going back to that example where I was saying where you could just as easily store some of their personal information on a spreadsheet or on a piece of paper on your desk or something like that, where you choose to store it is not as much of a concern as to the fact that you are storing it somewhere. And so you're choosing to store it in Stripe because that's your payment provider and that's the provider that you chose to use. And I believe that you because you chose to store it there, that's kind of on you to should something go wrong with that data. It's still up to you to let them know that data has been compromised. In an event of it getting hacked, I believe. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer, so that could be totally wrong. But I think that would be the good citizen type thing to do if the data does get compromised. Would be to kind of inform people of that. Now, as far as a legal standpoint, what could happen to you should Stripe get hacked into or something? I don't know that for sure.
Yep, exactly. And that's definitely something you want to talk to your attorney about. And if you have not yet investigated it, and this is just a word to the wise, you probably want to investigate business insurance that covers this sort of data liability. It's a little expensive, not terribly expensive, but might really be something you want to look at as an investment for your business so you're not on the hook for something major. So yeah, Scott, this is great stuff today. A lot of questions. Thanks for jumping in even on some of these legal matters concerning GDPR. And folks, I do recommend the webinar that I dropped in the chat earlier. I'll do that one more time from Anna Blanche Rabe, the attorney who spoke on this on iThemes training back last May. Virtually everything she talked about there is still applicable. So if you have not watched that webinar, please do so. It'll give you a lot more of the granular legal details, and there's a really good Q&A at the end of that webinar as well. But Scott's given us a great way with Privacy WP to practically implement some of the erasure and export requests that people can have. So yeah, Scott, thanks for some really, really good information today. Any last thoughts as we're wrapping up?
I think it's one of those things with GDPR that you need to kind of just take a step back and look at your overall business process. That's kind of the biggest thing is just understand what you're doing with the data. Why are you keeping this data? Do you need to do anything to reduce your risk by removing some of that data if you no longer need it, for example? And it's a lot of information to take in, especially for businesses that are maybe solo type businesses, freelancers and things like that. But if you do a little bit of legwork up front, you'll be much better off in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. And once again, we did drop that coupon code back in the chat. So 25% off of Privacy WP using coupon code iThemes. That does not expire. So even if you're watching this webinar a long time in the future, you can use that and get 25% off the Privacy WP package that is right for you. We'll have the replay of today's webinar in about an hour at the link that's also in the chat room there. Thank you all for being with us today. Hope it was a good investment of your time. Again, my name is Nathan Ingram, and for all of us here at iThemes, we hope you have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time here on iThemes Training, where we go further together.